Good to go?
Yeah, we good to start?
We're good to go.
Okay. So, hello, and I'll move over here. So I'm not saying in front of you like a weirdo. Thank you for coming to our anniversary author series. This is our tailgate trio, and our moderator for tonight is Jonathan from the College of Ulster.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. Great to have you here. We've got an exciting program for everyone tonight. And I think the way it will work is that each of our authors will have some remarks and then an opportunity for you to ask questions at any time. And then, of course, we've got the books over here available for sale as well. So we have three distinguished authors with us tonight, and I'll introduce them from my left to the door there. Our first author is Marc Bona. Marc is a features writer for Cleveland.com and The Plain Dealer. He is a prolific author and has written such epic books as Hidden History of Cleveland Sports, The Reason We Play, and a football-based novel, The Game Changer. Previously worked in assorted editing roles for the Post-Tribune in Gary, Indiana, Times Union in Albany, New York, the Detroit News, San Antonio Light, and the Dallas Morning News. So he's got quite an impressive resume. Marc is a graduate of the University of Iowa and has won numerous Cleveland Press Club writing awards. He lives in Akron with his wife, Lynn Sherwin, and their rescue pup, Addie. Please welcome Marc to our forum today. Our next author is Scott Longert. Scott has written 6 books on Cleveland baseball history. He's been interviewed on radio and television stations around the country. He will be featured on a soon-to-be-released documentary, War on the Diamond, a study of the long rivalry between the Cleveland Guardians and the New York Yankees. That is certainly going to be an interesting documentary. Please welcome Scott to our forum this evening. And to my far left, we have Marc Zimmerman. Marc is a native of the Cleveland area, graduate of Bowling Green State University, where he majored in broadcasting and minored in American literature. Marc entered the workforce at WABTV in Cleveland, working behind the scenes for 6 years. His 12-year advertising career followed, beginning as a copywriter, producer, creative director, where he won local, regional, and national, and even international recognition. In 1993, concurrent with his advertising career, he re-entered the radio world, working mainly as the morning drive host on WCRF in Cleveland. Currently, he is the morning drive host for Heartfelt Radio, which you can find at 91.9 on your FM dial, based with studios in Barberton. Marc and his wife Wendy have been married for more than 35 years. They have 3 grown daughters, 2 great sons-in-laws, and also 2 grandchildren. A lifetime Cleveland baseball fan, Marc wants what we all want, just one more World Series title before he dies. And Marc, we hope it happens before that. We're all on board with you. Marc's first novel is Eli, the Phenom Story. Great read. So please welcome Marc to our forum this evening. As I mentioned, all the books are available here whenever you would choose to purchase one. And we'll now hear from each of the authors, beginning with Marc Bona.
So I guess I'll just give a brief bio and move on, and then we can take questions on either the books or writing or editing or anything else. I started at the Plain Dealer in 2000, and in 2014 I jumped over to our digital side, and for most of that time I've been a features writer. I get to write about all the fun things in life. So I write about food, restaurants, beer, wine, sports history, and sports entertainment. There's enough people writing about cops and courts and politics, and nobody needs me to add to that noise. So I have a very, very fun job. I started writing about sports many years ago. I love sports. I played sports as a kid, but I was pretty young when I realized that I wasn't going to make it in the majors as a second baseman. Couldn't hit a fastball, couldn't hit a curveball, and my fielding was average. So I did the next best thing, and I started writing about sports. I was sports editor in college at the University of Iowa. We had a very good newspaper, and it really opened up a lot of worlds for me. I was able to cover Division I sports. I was laying out the paper. I was editing. I just did all sorts of jobs, and it just opened up so much, and I absolutely loved it. I think very fondly of my time then, how I cut my teeth there. And every job I've had since, with maybe just one exception, I've never been in in sports full time. I've always been in another department, but I kept my feet in sports somehow, some way. I'm a huge believer that a story does not have to have a score in it to be considered a sports story. Rick Riley, former Sports Illustrated writer who's written several books, who's very funny, had a great line about sports writing, and he said, I don't write about sports, I write about the people who play them. I absolutely love that. That motivates me in whatever story I'm doing. I think there's always a story to be told, and there's always another story. Cleveland in particular has a lot of minor league sports that often get overshadowed because we're all paying attention to the majors. I think there's great stories there. It's never ending. I could do that beat 24/7 and get rid of everything else and just be really happy, but it all keeps me pretty occupied. So that's it.
Thank you, Mark. Scott?
Well, I've been writing since the 1980s. Actually, it's been about 40 years. I don't know where all the years have gone. I am retired from the National Park Service. I was a park ranger at the James A. Garfield National Historic Site, and always interested in American history. That's what I studied in college and postgraduate. And at a point, somewhere in the 90s, I decided to try and write some full-length books. I had written some freelance articles about various things, about old Cleveland ball players. And my first book was a biography of Addie Joss, who pitched for the old Cleveland Naps back from 1902 up until his death in 1911. And that's what intrigued me about him, that he died at 31, and I wanted to try and dig out his story, I guess, so to speak. So once I did that, I was kind of in the mode of writing. It's really something I've always liked to do. Going back to elementary school, I was always writing things and putting my thoughts on paper. And luckily, I've been able to do it for a number of years. It's all about baseball. That's all I've been writing about. Baseball has been my favorite sport since a little kid. And like Mark, I played till I couldn't play anymore. When I couldn't hit a curveball, I was okay with the fastball. The curveball was my downfall, and I had to give it up then. However, writing's been really a joy. To all the people I've met and the places I've been able to go to, and the things that I've learned, some of the families I've met of the old-time ball players, just really wonderful. Chance to correspond with Bill Wamby way back in the 1980s. I think that was great fun. Joe Wood, very briefly. So it's been really quite a ride, and I think Cleveland baseball history is really great. We haven't won many World Series, obviously, too. But I still think Cleveland is just one of the great towns for baseball, going back to the 1860s and 70s with the Forest Cities, and then in the National League with Cy Young and the Spiders and winning a championship there, and then being a charter member of the American League starting in 1901 and still there with only a couple other teams like Detroit and Chicago. And we're still going strong. We were in the playoffs. We didn't get much further than the first round, but there's a lot of hope. And I just love looking at the history of the ball club and the people, and I look forward to continue writing. I did have a chance, probably my best opportunity of a lifetime. I did speak at the Baseball Hall of Fame back in August. It was a great experience to talk about my new book, Victory on Two Fronts. And so I've kind of done just about everything I wanted to do. So it's really been a great ride, and it's been a great time for me.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, the curveball humbles all of us. Yeah,
I think so.
Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Me too. Like these two guys, I played till I couldn't. The line out of Moneyball, you're always told when you can't play the child's game. Some of us are told before others. But yeah, I played all the way through high school, and very interestingly, writing-wise, my writing career started at probably about the age of 8, when I rewrote a Charlie Brown Christmas so that it could be done by my classmates and I actually got a very kind note from Charles Schultz, who was probably not worried that many copyrights were violated in the process. Once I graduated college, from Bowling Green, I did baseball and hockey, had on the radio, and had the great pleasure of watching the entire career of the two Bowling Green contributions to the Miracle on Ice, Ken Morrow and Mark Wells. And this lanky pitcher when I was doing the Bowling Green baseball games, whose name I laughed the first time I heard it, but I wasn't laughing after I saw him. His name was Oral Hershiser. And so, radio career all through college, Channel 43, as was mentioned at the start. My first job, 2 months in at Channel 43, I had already been exposed to John Lanigan and his temper, Barnaby, and Superhost. And they put me in the booth as the assistant director for the baseball games with Joe Tate and Bruce Strand. Everything you've heard about Bruce is true, and it's wonderfully true. And Joe was such a great man, great professional, and I leaned into him often to get answers to questions that I had about broadcasting. Writing came and went in my life as far as my advertising career, 12 years. Did a number of different projects in writing, concepting, and pulling things together as a creative director, but then back to radio again as a morning drive host and an interviewer, which is one of my very, very favorite things to do. I really resonate with what Marc said a couple of moments ago, that you can do a great job reporting sports without ever telling anybody the score. I've had 2 wonderful relationships come in the last 10 years that I never would have expected, and I'm so glad I had. I got to know, the Mastersons, Justin and Merrill Masterson, when they were here in Cleveland, and I had the opportunity to accompany Justin to Kenya to visit basically one of the worst slums in the world. And I had never imagined a place like that before in my life. And I've been to El Salvador and the Dominican and seen some pretty bad things. The other couple, still playing, as a matter of fact, hopefully he'll get into the game tonight, would be Kyle Gibson and his wife Elizabeth. And Kyle was with the Twins when I met him and escorted him on a trip in Haiti. And he and Elizabeth are just a wonderful, wonderful couple who are so ministry-minded for such young people. From there, Kyle went to Texas and now on to the Phillies. And the Noah Syndergaard trade kind of bumped him to the bullpen, so he's been having trouble getting some pitching time recently. But I've been so fortunate to encounter such people and such great people in my broadcasting and my writing career. As far as re-entering as a writer with a historical novel, which, as a matter of fact, the first draft went to Scott so that he could tell me if my history was correct or not, and he gave me passing marks. But really what spawned that novel was encounters all my life with the Amish. I've always wondered, we played softball against some Amish guys when I was working at a golf course in college. And they invited us to come play at their place. And their place was being cut by 2 draft horses pulling a rotary mower that had the grass at a nice 6 to 8 inch height, so that if you took your eyes off the ball when it was hit to the outfield, you'd lose it. And they beat us like 24-5 or something like that. And I wondered if these guys were so fast and they were so strong in those compact bodies, I had wondered if any one of them ever had the chance to break out, could they, and play baseball, play in the major leagues. And so that idea got tucked away for a long, long time, until the governor of the state of Ohio in March of 2020 decided that I couldn't go anywhere, I couldn't do anything, and I couldn't have any fun. So one Saturday morning, I pulled the idea out, I opened up my laptop at 5:30 in the morning, and I started typing.
That's it.
And there's Eli. So that's my story. At at this point.
And still more to be written, right?
Huh?
Still more to be written, right?
6 more ideas, yeah. You know, only one of them involves Eli, but yeah, 6 more novels, and they all have baseball as part of where they're going.
Fantastic. So as you can see, we've got fascinating history here, great backgrounds, and now we open it up to you, invite you to ask any questions that you might have about their works or about their experiences. Please feel free to ask away. Go ahead.
I'd like Mark to talk more about how the radio station he's on now got started. It really means a lot to me.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's it actually was a station that existed in Brunswick, at a church in Brunswick, and it was actually off the air more than it was on the air when it was purchased by Christian Healthcare Ministries at the end of 2018. And I saw the purchase because I had been out of radio for a few years, and I saw the purchase show up on the FCC website, but I just decided I wasn't going to pursue that. And if God had a way that He was going to get me there, He could figure that out Himself. I wasn't going to interfere. And basically, the folks at Christian Healthcare Ministries reworked everything technically, and the only thing that actually survived from that awful condition that everything was in was their transmitter. It's our backup transmitter now, out at the site in Creston. But everything else was pretty much useless. So I would not recommend trying to start a radio station with 5 employees when you're in your 60s and you're starting a global pandemic. It's not the easiest path to success, but it's been a wonderful ride. It's great to be back, and I get to train some people and teach some of the things that I've learned over the last 25 to 30 years, and it's really fun. Thanks for asking.
Other questions about their books or their experiences?
Question for this Mark. You're kind of a rare bird nowadays. Most people work for a website or work for a newspaper or pretty specialized. You seem to have kind of a broader portfolio than people nowadays. How has that come about?
The short story on that is I was an editor for way more years than I was a writer, technically. And I was in a mid-level editing role, and years ago, about 12, 13 years ago, I came home one day and I told my wife, and I said, the company is getting very serious about wanting to split us into 2 segregated divisions, one for print and one for online. And at the time I was at the Plain Dealer, I was in print only. And I said, one of 2 things is going to happen. I'm either going to be made a writer or I'm going to be laid off. So I started writing more and more and more as best I could. And it was, for 2 years, it took a lot out of me because, and this wasn't books, this was just stories. But sure enough, when the day of reckoning came, basically, some people got laid off, some people stayed at the Plain Dealer, and I was one of them, and some people were asked to jump over to Cleveland.com. A year in, the executive editor at Cleveland.com had liked what I was doing, and he said, how would you like to come over? And I said, sure. So at this point now, for a year, I had been, 2013, 14, I had been a full-time writer, started with beer. Beer, even if you don't drink, beer is a huge, huge thing in Northeast Ohio. We are one of the biggest top 5 craft brewing producing states in the country. It is an economic force, it's an economic driver, it's a very big deal, people are passionate about it. And we had nobody really covering it, so I started doing more and more and more stories. Brewers are the nicest people on the planet. They don't make much money, they work their butts off, they're willing to share and collaborate. No other business has so much collaboration between these people. It was just that led to the next step, led to food, led to wine, and I love sports, and there's a laissez-faire approach in my shop. People said, you like sports history? Go after it. You like this? Go after it. So I just kept doing it. It's it's a double-edged sword because I don't have downtime, which is a good thing. I like being busy, but you're constantly juggling. You know, what am I doing today versus what I'm not doing, type of thing. But that's how I fell into it. Other people, it was different. Some people were writers the whole time and they stayed doing what they were doing. I mean, obviously, we're always going to need a Browns writer and we're always going to need a City Hall writer. But I was in features and I was able to kind of do all the fun stuff, basically.
Yeah. We might have too many Browns writers, but we won't go there.
Question over here.
Marc, Zimmerman, I wonder why you chose 1946 for the start of this, because I was born in 44.
Okay.
And I remember going to Cleveland games when I was about 6 or 7 years old with my grandparents. It was 100 miles from where we lived to Cleveland and 100 miles back. So that was definitely an all-day trip in those days.
Well, thank you for that one, because there are a lot of good reasons I chose 46. It was the year that Bill Veeck bought the team, and my fictional player, Eli Weaver, he is, yes, a fictional construct in that 1946 season and in the book, but Bill Veeck plays a huge part in the book. He's my baseball hero.
Do you use a midget in there too?
No midgets in my book. Were harmed in the making of my book. But 1946, because it was the year Bill Veeck bought the team, because the team was in 5th place when he bought it and finished 6th, I did not want to make my hero, my fictional hero, a guy who came in and saved the day, every time and hit a home run to win the game. I had to operate within some sort of framework, and so if you go to baseballreference.com and you look up the results from the 46 season, every game I have in that book ended exactly the way, with the exact score that I reported did, but Eli operates within that construct. So 46 also, Amish folks don't like getting their pictures taken. There was no TV in Cleveland in 1946. Channel 5 actually did not sign on until Christmas of 47. So Eli could avoid a lot of that. There was actually, when Veeck bought the team, there was no radio coverage. He reinstituted radio a couple weeks after he bought the team. I kind of moved that timeline up a bit. It also was helpful, as I found out, that there's very little record of how Jack Graney, who was the legendary announcer in those days, how he sounds. Nobody really knows, because there's really no audio clips. And so I had some freedom there in the parts of the book where I take you onto the radio call of the games, because I didn't have to worry about imitating catchphrases or any of that stuff. So I had some freedom and latitude there. And then the other reason for 46 was basically, by 1949, Bill Veeck knew he had to sell the team because of his divorce proceedings, and I didn't want to go there. And there was the pressure on them after 48. I didn't want to put Eli into a world championship season in 1948. I didn't think that was the right thing to do. 47 was Larry Doby's year. I didn't think that would be the right thing to do. But 46 took the pressure off because it wasn't a very good team. And Bill Veeck could then promote Eli with some of the, no spoilers, but some of the promotions that you'll see happening in the book. And so it was a lot of fun. Now, I did consider other time periods when I was thinking about writing this. I did sketch out a little thing where Eli Weaver would meet Albert Bell in 1994, and I just thought, no, that's not where I want to go. So, yeah, there were some other things I tried, but 46 seemed to be the right, and it was also the right time because the Red Sox ran away with the pennant that year, so there was no pressure of that kind either, and it allowed some of the segments in the book where Ted Williams kind of befriends Eli a little bit, which is was kind of fun to play with. So there were a lot of good 1946 reasons.
Good.
Yeah.
But if I could jump in, since I've read your book, some of the things you write about, like the promotions, are true to go back live.
Right.
Yeah.
They weren't specific promotions that he ever did,
Right.
but I applied what I know about Vec from all the books I've read of
Yeah.
how he operated to Eli and how he would have handled this 19-year-old kid and promoted him. So, yeah, it was fun to do.
Other questions?
I have a question for everybody. You started with newspapers, broadcasts, all those sorts of things. How did you make the jump to writing books, or is it even that much of a jump?
Well, actually, that's all I've done.
Okay.
As I said, I was a park ranger and a historian, but the two kind of intersect in that you study American history. I did post-Civil War up to the Depression years, and plus being a huge baseball fan, you're kind of doing both at the same time studying. So it's kind of a natural extension to write about what I knew was baseball and Cleveland history, and put the two together. And so that's kind of how that started. I never envisioned being in television or radio or things like that. I just wanted the writing career, and it's a lot of luck involved too. If I didn't get a publisher for the first book, that probably would have been the end of it. In the 1990s, I just put it aside and moved on. However, that's how it got started, and I think really it's you kind of write about what you know. That's like people always say, write what you know. And I just knew Cleveland baseball history extremely well, and I had some background in education, and I thought I'd give it a shot. And luckily, it turned out okay. It's never been a full-time profession, but I've been able to continually write and have a publisher and get the works done. But I think it's if you know the subject well and you have some knowledge about how to write, and plus there's always editors, so no matter what you write, they're going to school you on what you're doing. So I learned quite a bit from that, from the editors that I've had, how to really use English grammar better, use language better, and how to structure a paragraph and a sentence and a chapter, and it all kind of evolved, I think, from there. So I think that's been my experience to date.
In my case, about 20 years ago, I wanted to do more personal writing, and
and that's been my saving grace. All the ideas I've had, they've accepted, and they published since that point. And we have a new one coming out next year. And they are university press, which means you're limited. They know themselves they are not going to make a ton of money, and they're also not going to be able to do the advertising publicity that you would want if you some. You're almost on your own in that sense, lining up speaking engagements and going to craft fairs. But it's been a good relationship. They're very good house. The editors are excellent. They make my books 10 times better and all. But the publishing industry, now I don't know what I would do if I didn't have a publisher. I don't think I would be able to get published by any other company. I remember years ago, somewhere in the 2000s, before I got to Ohio University Press, I sent a letter to this house, not a large house at all. I didn't know them very well, but it said they'd like to do sports. And they got back to me and said, we like your idea, it looks really good, we have to ask you one thing. And I said, sure, what? And they said, would you be willing to buy 300 copies of our first printing? And I said, no, I wouldn't be willing to do that. Because I guess that would get them to break even, and I'm on my own.
At full price or volume discount?
I discounted, like 40%, something like that, buying 300, and I don't think I could sell 30. I don't know. So those are the pitfalls you run into. It is difficult. The market has shrunk, so it is tough. But if you can get there, it's very rewarding. And I think the thing is, if you have a good idea, be true to it and develop it as much as you can, and hopefully you can find a home these days, which I know is not an easy thing to do.
Mark, any more insights on your experience?
Well, I'll just talk about the self-publishing part of it and some of what I've learned, especially from Amazon. Amazon offers you a lot of free services when you self-publish. And these free services mean you can choose your font from about 6. You can choose your headline. You can choose your photo for your cover, and all of these, things that are free. But also, you don't have a chapter ending where it looks good to end on a piece of paper, and you'll see the next chapter start, but there's no words until you get to the top of the next page. And so, getting back to this woman that I love for 37 years, when she said, okay, let's do it, I said, okay, now you're saying let's publish this, self-publish this, but here's what I want to do. Knowing that this may be the only shot I get at doing this, I want to do it my way as the son of a creative art director growing up during the Mad Men era, and as someone who knows the relationship that art has with words. So we're going to not use the free services that Amazon provides, and I'm going to choose my interior, the guy who designs the interior of the book. I'm going to choose the person who designs the cover, and I'm going to choose the person who does the cartoons. And when you put a lot, and I'm not going to say all, but when you put a lot of Amazon self-published books next to each other on a shelf, they all kind of look the same. And I didn't want that to happen. And that's where all that design work came from, and that's why it's been a little more of a struggle to break even, because we did put some money into it, because we wanted it to jump off the shelf when it sat on the shelf. And so the self-publishing route is good, but I would say that you need to have your own ideas and thoughts behind the creative product that actually winds up appearing on the shelf. Because if you don't, it's just going to look like a lot of other things that are being mass-produced off of Amazon. And frankly, that's not what I wanted. I wanted something that was going to look like it had a lot of help from a publisher, but didn't. And Hope I figured that out.
Do we have any aspiring authors here?
Oh, come on, everybody raise your hand.
Other questions for our authors here?
I have one.
Sure. Yeah.
So, you're all baseball guys, so I gotta ask this question.
What do you think about the Guardians? I think that every time.
No. It's a much bigger and deeper question. Do you think baseball will ever do an NFL-style salary cap so that small market teams can not only develop their talent, but don't act as farm teams for the Yankees or the Dodgers? Do you think they'll ever figure it out and go, if we don't let them develop their players and keep their players?
When Costas becomes commissioner, he wrote about, Bob Costas wrote a book back in 1998 called Fair Ball, I think it was. Very short book, but he outlines that exact scenario 25 years ago. There's, I mean, you think the Yankees and Red Sox and Dodgers are going to give up?
They got one vote in meetings.
Yeah, I know, but they have built-in advantages and they have lots of friends.
Yeah.
And money, their money buys a lot of friends. I hope so someday. I hope so.
It's an intriguing thought. I don't know. I mean, that's fascinating. I'm not sure. The way commissioners work with sports, I know each one is different. The relationship they have with the owners, they're very beholden to those owners, and sometimes I think, I mean, in the case of football, I think Adele's a figurehead. I think he's a $26 million bag man, pretty much. You know, the true leadership is coming from, for better or worse, is coming from the owners, and that's a lot of power. So I'm not sure. Very intriguing idea, though.
Yeah, I think if it happens, it's a ways off. It's not going to happen in the near future. You can look to the history of the game. The owners have always dominated from day one, and they still do. I think they dictate a lot of the policy. And the big cities, there's quite a few. The teams like don't, and maybe they're not the Yankees or the Red Sox, but the Atlanta Braves, San Diego, San Francisco, they all apparently have a very good fan base, and they can buy and sell as they wish. And I don't see the need for them to come to Chicago, come and say, yeah, we'd like to have a cap. You know, it would benefit greatly the small market teams, but the Guardians proved showed this year you can advance without a $250 million payroll. It can be done. But again, with the Guardians, I think everything went well. They didn't have any setbacks. They had a couple of pitchers get hurt, but their top three pitchers, Bieber and Quantrill McKenzie, I don't think any of them missed a start, and that's pretty rare. And the position players, I guess Jose Ramirez had a bad thumb for a while, but you hardly had anyone be injured. So they had a full complement of players, and things just went their way. So they made a splash. But I worry next year that luck will even up, and someone's going to be out for 80 games, or Bieber's going to have arm surgery or something, and it's not going to go so well. So I think the struggle will continue, and the teams like the Yankees will dictate what goes on, and the Dodgers. I mean, I read a story a few days ago that the Dodgers are showing some interest in Aaron Judge, and they can come up with the money for it. I can't imagine adding him to that lineup. It's like one of that's like a Hall of Fame lineup, and you can put the all-time home run, who hits the guy who's 62 home runs, you're going to put him in, add that to the lineup. It's just mind-boggling, the differences that we have. You know, I commend the Indians front office doing a fabulous job, but I don't know how they can sustain against the pressure when you're going up against all-star players and unlimited payrolls. I think you have to have everything fall your way to win, and I think they did this year. Usually in baseball, other sports, it evens out. The next year, things don't fall. The guys don't bunt and get safely, or guys don't turn doubles into triples every time, and somehow they get thrown out. You know, it just happens. The guys don't steal. I mean, Miles Straw got thrown out once. I mean, he's a great base stealer, but the law of averages says he's going to get thrown out a lot more next year, or somebody else is taking the same path. And in the playoffs, when was Gonzalez with the little pop up into right field over Rizzo's head. I mean, that was like a little league out, but it won a game for us. And those things just don't happen on a regular basis. So I think the big teams will keep dominating. It's like going long-winded here. I don't see a salary cap coming in the near future.
I saw some other hands, other questions? Yeah.
Oh, this goes for everybody. Cleveland sports is very vast and has many stories, tragic and triumph. If you could pick one moment, what's each one of your favorite moments in Cleveland sports history?
I would say first one, 1920, winning the pennant and winning the World Series. That was, I think, a highlight in our history. Even though it was 102 years ago, it was a tremendous accomplishment that Ray Chapman, of course, died. He was hit by the pitch ball in August, and the team managed to get beyond that and still win the pennant and go on to win the World Series. I think that's one of the great feats that in Cleveland baseball history. And that's again 1948, putting it all together, winning the pennant and winning the World Series. The ball club that Bill Beck put together, which is unbelievable, the talent and everybody came together. Larry Doby, Satchel Paige, and the lineup they had, and was able to do it for us. Those are my two signature moments. I know there's a lot of individual moments, like Rocky Colavito hitting his 4 homers in 19. I mean, I was 3 years old or 4 years old. I didn't know much about it, but everybody was excited. And then about a year later, I was a big Rocky fan. But that was quite a moment in Cleveland. Because I can remember the excitement, even though we didn't win anything. People talking for days about Rocky and what he accomplished. That was really outstanding. So I'm kind of really lost in the past. Like I don't look at the things that happened in the 90s and the early 2000s with the same level as going back a number of years. That's not to lessen the accomplishments. The championships we've won and going on to the World Series in the 90s, and guys like Lofton and Bell and Manny Ramirez, Mike Harper managing, they've done wonderful things. But I look back to those older times and these people, what they accomplished in much harder circumstances, and we're able to bring some real happiness to the city. And still, you look at baseball history, and those are two really good. They stand up to anybody. The Yankee history or Cleveland Dodgers and LA history. I think they age well with all the other great accomplishments we've had in baseball.
My answer, you'll have to help me out on some of the facts, but Scott's first book was a biography of Addie Joss, as he said, who was one of the greatest pitchers of his era, tragic hero, died very young. And as you said, my rescue pup is named Addie, after Addie Joss. Addie Joss pitched in, and this is a very debatable, arguable point, but in my opinion, pitched in quite possibly the greatest pitcher's duel in the last 120 years. He went up against the White Sox and a guy named Ed Walsh. Walsh threw an absolutely incredible game. He had something like, Scott, you may remember this, something like, 2 walks and 4 hits, or 4 walks and 2 hits?
It's 3 hits and 15 strikeouts.
Phenomenal game. Goes the distance. Anybody would kill for that nowadays. It would be, a great win. And he lost the game because Josh was perfect. Perfect game, unbelievable. And what was interesting, so that was 1908. About 40 plus years later, Harvey Haddix threw this game, and he threw, I want to say he was perfect through 12 and lost the game in the 13th.
12 and 2/3.
Excuse me?
12 and 2/3.
So 12 and 2/3.
So Hancock's doubled.
Yeah. So he's into the 13th, loses the game, almost 13 consecutive innings of throwing perfect. And the little tidbit when I wrote about actually how I first met Scott years ago was at the 100th anniversary at Lee Park. There was a great ceremony to commemorate Addie Joss's game. And so there's only been 2 perfect games in Cleveland Indians history. Joss was first, Len Barker was second. The Indians got Barker to come out and throw a pitch at the exact time, 100 years to the minute, of when Joss threw his first pitch at where they thought the mound was at Lee Park. Thought that was neat. But the interesting trivial tidbit on all this is the night that Harvey Haddix was throwing his game, which I want to say was in the early 50s for some reason, and that night Ed Walsh died. So that's like goosebump raising for me. I love the historical connections like that.
Just a quick addendum. That game in 1908 was October 2nd. Cleveland, Chicago, and Detroit were fighting for the pennant. There were 5 games left in the season. Each team, there was a half game between the 3 teams. It was absolutely essential that Cleveland won the game. And to pitch a perfect game in the heat of the pennant race was just incredible. Plus, Walsh won 40 games that year. He was a workhorse. He was tremendous. He had a spitball that guys would say it would deteriorate, and then it would go to the catcher's glove, and the ball would come back, and you couldn't even see it. And that's how important the game was. It meant everything. And of course, the Navs lost the next day, and they lost on Monday, and they finished a half game out for the pennant.
It was like, we can talk about this all.
Yeah, it was do or die. It was the loser of that game was pretty much out of the race. That's what made it really.
And the pennant race was one of the greatest pennant races ever. It's 3 teams, and they were just, it was like a slugfest. They were like this in the standings constantly, and it was really exciting. But Mark, you got one?
Well, since we're talking about perfect games, I'm just going to go there. On May 15th, 1981, I was assistant director that night for the game between the Indians and the Toronto Blue Jays, and Len Barger was pitching. When the game got to the 7th inning, the director, Roger Shea, sent me and the future director of the games, Patrick Murray, and the sound guy. He sent us down to the Indians dugout on the first base side. My job, along with Pat Murray, was to hook our arms underneath Bruce Drennan after the 3rd out and get Bruce to Lenny. Well, the sound guy, a guy by the name of Larry Tressler, said, how far is it? Because we had no wireless mics in those days. Those didn't exist. So we had a wired mic that we were going to try to get out on the field for this post-game interview. So Larry says to me, how far is it from the dugout to the pitcher's mic? I said, Larry, I haven't the slightest idea. Well, he said, you know everything about baseball. You know all the distances in this ballpark. I said, nobody's ever measured from the, So I said, how much you got? And he said, well, I got 120 feet of mic cord. I said, okay, let's loop it. Let's try to get it in like 3-foot or 5-foot loops, and I'll just keep dropping loops as I go and counting to see how close, because I've got the mic in my hand, and I've got the loops around my arm. And Bruce, hey, partner, don't let me go. And so Bruce is, and so fly ball, center field, Manning is there, he's got it, 3rd out, game over, and we take off for the mound. And I may or may not have shoved John Telich out of the way. Maybe, because he was a newbie at Channel 8 at that time. So Bruce all of a sudden becomes, we get the mic to him, people are stepping on the court, and I'm thinking it's going to come out of that patch bay in the dugout. It's going to be dead before we even get to this interview. But Bruce grabs the mic, chases Lenny down the steps, and you can see this on the tape, and then reemerges with him. And so my job then, we had the camera sitting in the upper deck. We had 4 cameras back then. 4. We had home plate high, center field behind the fence, 3rd base high, upper deck, and first base, the guy who had to go to the bathroom before the game because he was in a little crow's nest, hanging off a girder by first base. And I had to get Bruce pointed to the first base camera. I had to physically turn him and Lenny and then just get out of the shot. So that's my perfect game story. Just absolute mayhem, and somehow that wired mic stayed in the patch bay in the dugout and didn't get yanked out, and it survived, and we got the post-game interview. But for a moment, I told you a little bit about my relationship with Justin Masterson. When I was walking through that slum in Nairobi with Justin, I got to see the real guy. And I will never forget it. I am not somebody who boos players at baseball games. And it's because of that. I think that solidified it for me on that trip. Because each of these guys is just a regular guy trying to raise a regular family in a very crazy situation where they're going back and forth and here and there across the country. And, people like the Mastersons and the Gibsons and Cody Allen and his wife, they work really hard to maintain some sort of, calmness in the midst of the craziness. And so I guess those are the moments I really do remember, maybe most of all, because I got to see the real people, even if it was just for a week. But it was really fun to watch those kind of people in that kind of situation.
Yes, sir.
Scott, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
I was thrilled to read your book about the Indians of the 1930s.
Oh.
And culminating in the Crybabies in 1940 and the Detroit Cleveland thing and all of that. In that book, you talk about a player who joined the Indians around that time and became known pretty well as a player and manager, Lou Boudreau. I know you have a penchant for history and research and all that thing. Is Boudreau perhaps one of the most underrated players ever down at Cleveland Indians, Cleveland Guardians?
Yeah, I think he is somewhat underrated. I'm not sure why, because he was the player manager of the 40-8 team. But yeah, in his time he was not. He was thought very highly of as one of the best shortstops in the game. But yeah, I think when people talk about Cleveland and the shortstops, you talk about Vizquel and others, you don't talk that much about Boudreau. The thing about Boudreau wasn't fast, but he didn't run well. But he had really bad ankles. He broke his ankle twice. But he had tremendous anticipation, and he could get to the spots the other guys could. He just did a little differently. He would be almost like cheating a step or two, but he would make the plays in the hole and behind the bag. He was a good hitter, a good clutch hitter. In the 48, the big doubleheader against the Yankees late in August, it was again a fight for the pennant. He had a bad ankle and wasn't playing. And we got the bases loaded, and we were behind, we were rallying, and he put himself in as a pinch hitter. He hadn't been playing, hadn't been practicing, and that was a huge moment. There was like 68,000 people at the game, and he came up there and he slammed a base hit up the middle, scored 2 runs to tie the game. And then Eddie Robinson homered to win it later. But he was a great leader, I think, and a good manager, not a Hall of Fame manager, but a Hall of Fame ball player. But yeah, I think he doesn't get his due. In his day, he was quite good at what he did. And in 48, soon as manager, he had his best year. When the money was on the line, Boudreau was tremendous. He went over 300 home runs, 100 RBIs. So I agree. I think he is somewhat underrated. But I think the years have something to do with it. I think you talk about center fielders, people will say right away, Kenny Lofton. But what about your Speaker and Earl Abel? They were tremendous in their time. Speaker, from what they say, he played a shallow outfield. He was almost an infielder. Yeah. But he could turn as soon as the ball was hit and would go back and make the play. And who does that today? Or nobody does that. So he was, I think at the time, kind of erases it. But yeah, I think Boudreau's a bit of
The other thing about Boudreau is he was a very young manager.
Yeah.
And
24.
Yeah, and there's a lot to be said for that in any profession. That's a tough thing to pull off. You're dealing with trying to do your job, and you're trying to motivate people who are older than you, many of whom are going to think they know more than you, and that's a tough nut to crack. But
And 1948 almost never happened because in 47 that almost traded him to the Senators. And word of it leaked, and there were near riots in Cleveland, and Beck had to leave the World Series and go back and make peace.
Yeah, he did. He really had to.
have you seem like you like this era? Have you read Luke Epling's book, Our Team?
Oh,
Phenomenal book.
do it.
It is basically beautifully written and incredibly researched. It's 4 biographies in one. He intertwines them. It's Satchel Paige, it's Larry Doby, it's Bill Veeck, and it's Bob Feller. And their lives and their careers intersect in interesting ways, especially Feller and Page. just absolutely fascinating. And the guy who wrote it is not a Clevelander. He really immersed himself in that.
Yeah.
He did a great job. He lived here for a while.
So it's been a fascinating hour. I think our official time is just about up, right? No, we can continue, okay. Are there any other questions? And if not, we will have time afterward. I think the authors will stay, but go ahead.
I'd like to ask, you mentioned something about a documentary coming, or what is that about?
It's titled War on the Diamond. It's about the rivalry over the years between the Yankees and the Indians. And it starts with the death of Ray Chapman, and that made a lot of bad blood. And from then on, things were not good between the teams. And there's lots of different eras covered about bad things with the Yankees and the Indians. And even today, about how, it's when Cleveland beats New York, it's a big thing. Or any game at Progressive Field, the Yankees are there, you got a huge crowd. And people just want to see the Yankees lose. It's kind of a...
Too many of them from New York.
Yeah.
Their money is just as green, though.
And it talks about George Steinbrenner and his attempt to buy the ball club and what might have happened had he been here. It also interviews some of the players. Sandy Alomar talks about the famous the midges attacking Mr. Chamberlain, the pitcher, and him losing it on the mound there. And we won the game with the wild pitch. So it covers like from 1920, I think, through the early 2000s. It's a nice...
Scott gets some good camera time on this. I was interviewed
You get
for 40 minutes. I got about 11 seconds.
All of the documentaries, huh?
Call me cutting room floor Mark. No, Scott gets...
I was early, so that's probably why. But it's supposedly actually going to be available for viewing starting November 15th. They said Amazon Prime.
Yeah, a bunch of different streaming services.
Yeah, all kinds of
Amazon
streaming
Prime?
services. Yeah, so we're hopeful it'll be there. The guy did Andy Billman as a Clevelander, and he's worked for ESPN and others for years and years, and he did a good job putting it together. And I think it's a good thing if people have a chance to see it.
Other questions? So, oh yes.
Just for Mark, just out of curiosity, could you expound a little bit on your interactions with Orville Shizer?
Haven't had many. I mean, at Bowling Green, he was pretty immersed in fraternity life. So, we could say hi to each other. Interviewed him when I was at WCRF. His book came out, I think his second book, not Out of the Blue. He did one after that, and I can't remember what the title was. But not very many interactions with him. Good guy, seemingly pretty pleasant. Never understood what happened between him and Bowling Green State University. I think there was some bad blood there for a long time, but I think they're back on speaking terms. So.
I have a very quick anecdote about Oral Hershiser. Somebody interviewed him once here where he plunked someone to
Retaliation.
Yeah, I don't know if it was retaliation, but I think it was because it was intentional for whatever reason. And a reporter asked him afterward, basically said, he was very outspoken with his Christianity. And he said, you're something along the lines of you're a Christian. I'm surprised you did that. And without missing a beat, he says, being a Christian doesn't mean being a wimp.
Oh yeah, Masterson said the same to me. He said, I'm going to pitch inside. That's my part of the play. And if you stand there, then you're going to get hit. He said, that's my part of the play, and you can't have it. Yeah.
Any other questions? So before we close, Marc Zimmerman posed the scenario of seeing the Indians or the Guardians win before his life comes to an end. Ask each of the three of you for a one or two word answer. Will it happen in our lifetime? Start with you at the end.
Man, what a chance they have right now. Yeah, everything, like Scott said, everything went right. That is true. But with all the guys that they have, and all the guys who are lined up behind them, the wisdom of Antonetti and Chernoff, and that army of scouts that they have, they've got a real shot at this in the next 5 years. And we'll just see how it goes. Because, like Scott was saying, lots of things can happen. Bloopers don't always fall in, and arms were not made to throw pitches with this kind of torque. They do fall apart. So.
Short answer is going to be yes, I think they will. And I base it on, we now have a minority owner, and I guess he is pretty cash. He's got some money to spend. If he'll put some money in the club to actually buy a good free agent or two, I think yes, we have a shot.
Great. I'm going to say yes, and I'll say definitely within 3 years. I was really optimistic about the way that team produced this year. Scott hit the nail on the head, though. Even though I'm not one to talk about luck, what's the famous line about luck? Preparation leads you to luck. Yeah,
It's a John Wooden quote,
Yeah.
something like that.
So much is attributed to Wooden, it's amazing. But I think they can do it. It will take some luck. I mean, what Scott was saying is that was amazing and true, that so many guys did not get hurt. It's so easy to get these guys to tweak something and then they're out. You miss a key component. But that organization has really created a culture from top to bottom where they really want everybody to feel like they're part of the team and they're all working for the same goal. I'm talking about the people, the support staff people as well as the players, the development specialists they have to bring these guys along at their positions in the minor league ranks. All of that is important and necessary, and it's not found in every single team in every single league. So, the giant asterisk is luck. That they need they need to stay healthy, but everybody does.
I kind of reflects on that. I always, when I watch them, it's because they'll sign that first contract, and then usually they never sign a second contract, unless you have a homer that is willing to stay there. And he doesn't want to put up with the New Yorks and the Los Angeles and getting torn apart. So I always said the team always has like in '95 when they were it. I mean, I don't think they ever lost 3 games. If they lost 3 games in a row, they always won and got into a streak. What I'm saying is, I think with the way those smaller teams are, they only have like a 5-year window.
Oh, if that.
If that, because people start getting traded in between, and then you got to find somebody else to fill that spot.
I will say this, even though I do, we all have a soft spot for small market teams for obvious reasons. I do appreciate, this is an odd thing to appreciate or respect, but Brian Cashman, the GM front office guy with the longtime Yankees guy, got a little tired of that whole topic, and he said, you know what, this is years ago, he said, you only have, X number of $1 million, on your payroll, tough. Find a way to win, that's your job. That's actually, they're competitors in the front office as well as the guys on the field, and you gotta be creative. They've gotta find ways to do it, and that culture that the front office has created with the Guardians, I think, can lead into a World Series victory.
Any other questions? I hate to have this come to an end. It's been incredible. I'm suggesting you 3 of you get together for a podcast. Very interesting. I'll throw one more out there. I'm a foreigner. I'm a Pittsburgh native. What about the Pittsburgh baseball franchise? It's just decimated. I think they're only one spot below the Guardians in payroll, but just an awful organization. And they're not the only one, but they're one of the worst. What's the future? I'll just phrase it this way: the future of Major League Baseball, specifically the small market teams.
I wonder if we're going to see people go to, in these next few years, what somebody might call in the news a Cleveland model. Because it's working. But the problem is, it took about 5 to 6 years to work. If a fan base is waiting for something to change, like overnight, the Cleveland model won't work for them. You got to start with those 16-year-olds in the Dominican Republic, and you got to start with those 21-year-olds or 20-year-olds who are going into their junior year in college. That seems to be their mode of operation, and it takes years, and man, you've got to be right. When you're drafting and signing, you've got to be right.
Yeah, I think too, the ownership has to have faith in their GMs and their staff. I mean, if the Dolans had pulled the plug 2 or 3 years ago, and Chris Antonetti and the other guys, they'd be starting over again. I think that's a problem in other organizations, that you've got to make a commitment to these guys, and I think they're very antsy. And like Pittsburgh, I see they develop talent that goes elsewhere, and they're not making any strides. Especially look at Brian Reynolds, tremendous ball player, and they signed him to a deal. He's in trade talks any story you read about trade, he's the one of the guys always in the. Why would you trade someone like that if you're trying to build a foundation? And I think that's they don't have a clear direction. I think that, and same Kansas City and Detroit as well. Detroit tried the model of signing a bunch of veteran players, and it didn't work out. Kansas City let all their guys go. They got a lot of young guys. Maybe next year they'll see some improvement. They were awful. I mean, they were just our division. Really, this year was just really just terrible. Other than the Guardians, the White Sox, the superstars, they were just underperforming right and left, and the Twins just fell off to nothing. I think the Indians, one thing they have that model and they've stuck with it. Where the other teams kind of like they go back and forth. But let's go with the young guys and let's get the free agents, and they're just spinning their wheels.
Forgive me, Scott, I'm smiling because the Chicago media were just celebrating and the Guardians went into there for that 4-game series.
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to catch them now.
Yeah. they hardly competed, which was amazing. They just went through the motions, it seemed like.
Yeah, they crumbled. That was amazing.
So who's gonna win the World Series now, this year?
Boy, having a wacky couple of games there. They got all their home runs out of their bats, and then last night happens. I love the fact that everybody's cheering for the Phillies, except for Houston, the people in Houston. So, I don't know. I guess I'll go Philadelphia, and that's my heart talking, based more on what I've seen in the past few days.
Yeah, pitching is when it comes down to it's pitching, and Houston's loaded with pitchers, and they're in a good spot right now to go back home to Houston, and we'll see how the Phillies can keep up.
Go fighting Phils. Yeah.
Any final? Yeah, one more.
So you guys all love baseball, and the Guardians and the Caps are both playing outstanding. I know football's probably not your main area, but what do you think it takes for the Browns to become a competitive football team?
But that's been a question for how many years? Yeah, they haven't found the answer yet. Honestly, I don't think we have the right ownership. I don't think we do. We need, I think, different ownership. And I think the people in power, they've had the team for quite some time, and they have not been able to produce. And I think we could use fresh blood or young blood or something in the front office. And that's, I think, until they do that, I don't see them winning a Super Bowl or being one of the top teams. They made a lot of mistakes, and I don't think it bodes well when you're in your division with the Bengals and the Steelers. You have to make the right decisions, and I think they made some some awful ones.
Yeah, I think they need consistency, and I'm not talking about consistency of getting to the AFC Championship every year. I mean consistency in winning for a few seasons to ground them. Pittsburgh is a great example of that. They had a very good quarterback. They stuck with him, but they also had a coach and a front office who believed in him and kept everyone else at bay, saying he's our guy, and they stuck with him. And it's interesting. My next book is going to be football, and I'm so hopefully optimistic about that team. But it's so. One thing you don't want in anything in life is you always want to move forward. I always have just get better a little bit at a time. But when you have this, it's like that's not good. It's not healthy, and in the end, it's not going to work. They need consistency on the field at varying positions. So many people for the last year especially have talked just about quarterback. It's a lot more than that. Football is nothing but chess and dominoes. If you have a bad offensive line or an injured one or a weak one, the quarterback gets pressured. The quarterback gets pressured, you lose your field position. You lose field position, you're in a bad place, you turn over the ball once, and all of a sudden you're just giving points away. And that was happening for the last 20 years. Like that was the game plan, more or less. And they've got to keep guys healthy, and it starts with the offensive line, and it goes from there.
Gentlemen, you were outstanding. Your knowledge and your perspective, just phenomenal. Congratulations to you as well for a great program. Thanks so much for coming out. It was great to have you. I think the others will be around. Feel free to pick up a book or two. They'll make the sign for you.
Absolutely.
Be all set.
Sure.
So, thank you all for coming. Have a great night.
Get your pen up.
I sure would. And for,
Bev or Bob, or just either Bev or Bob, or Bev and Bob.
Yes.
Young fella?
Looks
like Tom
I think some
Keith Kelly. Good to see you. Live here in Worcester? No, I just was over here last night for the sure food thing, and they said they were gonna have 3 sports writers, and so I came over.
So what you think?
So, yeah. Did you?